Good morning, friends. It's Saturday. We made it through another work week, and I'm back with Chapter 6 of my upcoming book, Campaign at Fort Stix. Now it's time to grab a snack, dim the lights, and let me take you into the mists of time with a story I call Infiltrator. The last day of spring break, Sunday, we returned home from the farm a lot earlier in the day. My mom said she needed to do laundry and get things ready for the return to school. This was fine with me, as I really wanted to get some time riding my bike. It had been over a week since getting it ready, and I still had not ridden it. Arriving at home, I glanced at my bike as I went into the house. I wanted to ride, but first I needed to translate my map and notes about the farm from the board where they were written to paper. I chose an empty notebook for my farm notes and carefully drew the map inside the front cover. Because I had so many things I wanted to write on the map, I numbered places to make notes about and used them as a key to pages in the notebook. As I wrote each numbered note, my mind drifted back over the preceding week. It had been very busy as my dad was preparing the farm for us to move in, but at the same time, I had a lot of fun and even learned some new things. In fact, I might have even learned more on spring break than I did in school. One of the things I learned was to make sure the lid was on properly when I put my coffee cans of worms in the refrigerator. I was out in the garage with my dad as he set up his toolboxes and compressor in preparation for doing auto repairs, when we heard my mother shriek in the kitchen. I followed my dad as he ran into the house to see what was the matter, and found my mom sitting at the table staring at the open refrigerator door. Following her gaze, I saw that some of my larger and stronger night crawlers had pushed the lid off of the coffee can and were in the process of migrating to various areas within. Like thick brown living raiment, they hung from the racks. I quickly gathered them up and put them back in the can. Nothing was said as I did this, and I endeavored to continue this trend as I closed the refrigerator and exited the area quickly. Sitting in the shade under the catalpa tree, I contemplated how the lid could have come loose. I knew my worms were lively, as they protested greatly at being put into the cans, squirming this way and that in an effort to escape. So I was pretty sure the lids had been secure, but I could not deny the evidence. I wandered toward the garage where I stopped for a moment to look at the bees and their industrious honey-making operation. Some of them flew out to greet me in the usual fashion of buzzing around my head, to which I calmly waved at them while thrashing my arms wildly about in an effort to encourage them to disperse. Then I heard a squeaking noise above the loud hum of the bees. It was Mark, in the garage with Dad. "Hey, Dad," he said. "I saw we got a bunch of worms in the fridge. When are we going to go fishing?" Aha, I thought. That's why my coffee can lid was loose. He was messing with my stuff again. Hearing this, I felt myself getting ready to verbally assault him for messing with my stuff again. But this was cut short when I heard my dad say he was thinking about going fishing in the morning. My mood suddenly changed for the better. We had not been fishing since the beginning of spring when we went out to the northern Indiana docks to fish for coho salmon and trout. It was still cold then, as the ice had only recently melted off the lake, making it necessary to wear jackets and gloves. I sauntered into the garage as my father finished speaking, and casually mentioned that the ice should be off the smaller lake by now. I further pressed my point by reminding Dad that the bass, bluegill, and sunfish would be getting ready to spawn. My efforts were not in vain, as he confirmed we were going fishing the next morning. It is nearly impossible to convey the intense sense of excitement and anticipation which consumes a 10-year-old boy in the hours preceding a fishing trip. For the rest of the afternoon, I could think of nothing except going fishing. It was difficult to keep myself entertained as I lost interest in everything else as I thought about what I needed to do to prepare when we got home that evening. In the past, these hours would be spent digging worms and getting my gear ready. This time, though, I had already acquired all the bait we needed and was miles away from my fishing pole. I could only mentally prepare for the trip until we finally arrived home. Upon hearing that a fishing expedition is imminent, one must begin preparation for the excursion immediately, lest one be caught unprepared at the moment of truth. It might be cold when you first arrive at the boat dock just before sunrise, so an extra layer of clothing is laid out the night before along with your favorite jeans and best fishing shirt. Next, the fishing pole and tackle box are located. This time, I did not have to look very hard because my fishing pole and tackle box were in the front hall closet with my fathers and brothers. It seems someone's little brother must have hit the line release button on his fishing reel when carrying the rods to the closet after the last trip, because several yards of line were intricately woven around all of the rods. Luckily, it only took me about 15 minutes or so to untangle the rods and get mine free. Grabbing my tackle box and fishing pole, I scurried off to my room to prepare. Inspecting the line, I found it frayed from wrestling coho salmon up the side of the docks earlier in the year. The rusty steel bulkheads separating the water from the concrete where we stood to fish was tough on line. Knowing we would be fishing from a boat and would not have to cast far to reach the fish, I stripped line from my reel until I got past the frayed line to the fresh line that had not yet been cast. After cutting off the bad line, I inspected the reel, to find there was only a few feet of line left, and it would all have to have new line. It only took a few minutes to remove the rest of the line. Reaching into the tackle box, I winced and jerked my hand out after it was poked by something sharp. A shiny new number 8 hook was now sticking into my finger. I pulled it out and laid it safely into one of the top trays, and reached in with the other hand to grab the spool of line, while sucking on my poked finger to make it stop bleeding. Neither my brother nor mother were available to hold the spool of line for me while I reeled it on, so I had to be content to set the spool on the floor and carefully wind while keeping tension with my fingers. Before long, it was re-spooled, and I was ready to tie on a hook and weight. I grabbed the hook, which had previously found me, and tied it on. Crimping a split-shot weight on the line above the hook completed the task, and my fishing pole was ready. I returned the line to the tackle box for future use, and as I was about to close the lid, I noticed it was a mess inside. It would not do to be fishing and have trouble getting a needed item from the tackle box because it was tangled with other items. So I laid some newspaper on the floor and dumped the entire contents of the tackle box onto it in a jumbled mess. Carefully separating and sorting the lures, hooks, line, and stringers, the contents was organized and returned to the box neatly. When I was finished, I wished I could take a picture because even the guys that wrote for my favorite outdoor magazines would be impressed to see it. Finally, my fishing pole and tackle box were ready to go. I carried them out and put them in the back of the truck so they would be handy in the morning. I also considered moving the worms out there, but decided to keep them cold and fresh in the refrigerator instead. Returning to my room, I saw it was long after bedtime, so I set my alarm and climbed into bed. Sleep did not come easily, as I was filled with anticipation. I would close my eyes and try to sleep, but just as I would start to doze off, the need to verify the alarm was set correctly would set in, and I would have to check it. Assured the alarm was set, I climbed back into bed and worked to calm myself off to sleep. This process was repeated multiple times as the fear of not waking up in time refused to be satisfied until it transformed into a new fear of not getting enough sleep. At some point, I finally fell asleep, only to be rudely awakened what seemed a few minutes later by the alarm. Shutting it off, I wanted to lay back down until something in my brain said we were going fishing. This energized me and I quickly dressed. I woke my brother, and together we tried to get Dad up without disturbing Mom. He muttered something about it being too early and rolled over away from us. I looked at his clock, and it was a few minutes after 4 a.m. It was not too early. I had set my alarm for 4 because I knew it would take 30 minutes to wake him up. Then we would need about an hour for him to have enough coffee and cigarettes while we ate cereal before he would be ready to go. Then there was the 30-minute drive to the lake, which would actually take closer to an hour because Dad would need to stop and get fuel for the boat and truck, where he would talk with the guy at the gas station like he always did. Once we reached the lake, it would take Dad at least 15 minutes to rent the boat, and that was a conservative estimate. If he stood and talked with the boat owner, it could take up to an hour, or until the next customer arrived to rent a boat. With sunrise at 7 a.m., we would just have enough time to get on the boat for the first bite as the sun peeked over the trees. So, no, not too early. Dad was being particularly grumpy this morning, so instead of making him angry by bugging him to get up, we decided to go eat our cereal before trying to wake him up again. This turned out to be a good plan. Anticipating the smell would draw him to the kitchen, I started a fresh pot of coffee before getting my cereal. By letting him sleep a little more, he begrudgingly got up the next time we tried to wake him and stumbled off to the bathroom at 5:30. Sitting back from writing my notes, I reveled in the memory of that first glorious fishing trip of spring. The sun was barely halfway from the treetops to high noon when we launched the boat. The water was clear and still that morning as there was no wind. Birds were singing and the time seemed to stop once we pulled the boat up to an old submerged tree and tied off to begin fishing. I had come fully prepared and was ready to catch fish. As it turned out, the fishing was slow and we only brought home enough for one meal, but it was a good day. Rubbing my eyes, I sat up and looked at my map and notes. As Grandpa instructed, I drew a map of the garden on its own page and wrote the dates when everything was planted. He said this was important so I would know from reading the seed packets when to expect plants to sprout, and also when vegetables should be ready to pick. He also said that sometimes we got bad seeds, and I would know to replant things if they did not germinate within the times listed. While most of my notes pertaining to the numbers simply had 1 or 2 lines in the notebook, there were a couple which were the head of entire pages. These were for research projects, and I had 2 top priority pages: how to get honey and how to make windows in Fort Stix. I planned to use my free time and any I could get away with in school to look these things up in the encyclopedia. I would look them up at home, but I wasn't allowed to remove the encyclopedias from school, and we didn't own any. When I finally finished writing everything down, I got up and headed out to ride my bike. I was feeling a little bit tired, but figured it was just because I had sat for so long. Stepping into the hall, I noticed the house was really quiet. Not unusual as long as my brother and I weren't running around, but this was even more quiet than usual. My brother's door was closed, and so was the door to my parents' room. On top of that, it was dark. I quietly made my way to the living room and looked out the big picture window. Not only was it dark outside as well, but the streetlights were already on. Obviously, I had been sitting longer than I thought. So much for bike riding. I returned to my room and yawned as I closed the door and laid on the bed. Reaching over on the bed table, I made sure my alarm was set and closed my eyes. Though I did not want it to end, I fell asleep and let spring break fade into the past. I woke before the alarm, much to my surprise since it was a school day. Secretly, I wondered if I was actually becoming a farmer, because I had always heard they went to bed when the sun went down and got up when it rose in the morning. Farmers also liked animals and grew gardens, just like I did. It was with some measure of excitement that I returned to school after spring break. Not that I was looking forward to sitting in class or listening to the teacher drone on about things for which I had no interest. No, I was eager to do some research on things I wanted to know more about, as well as share about the farm and new experiences with Kenny. When I got off the school bus, I did not even mess around going to the restroom or stopping by the office to buy pencils and paper. I went straight to my classroom, put my book bag on my desk, and headed over to the bookshelf where the encyclopedias were. It only took a minute to find the article about honeybees, and I took it to my seat to read. When the bell rang to begin class, I looked around, but Kenny was not in class. I hoped he was not sick, and gave it no more thought as I returned to reading about how to get honey from bees. To my surprise, the teacher did not object to my reading encyclopedias and taking notes the whole day. Morning recess, lunch, and afternoon recess all came and went with nary a word about my inattentiveness. I was able to complete my research for both subjects with no problems, and return the encyclopedia back to the shelf just before the final bell rang. With my notes tucked securely away in my backpack, I headed out to get on the bus to go home. Today, finally, I was going to get to ride my bike. At least that's what I was thinking until I emerged from the school to find my dad standing by his truck near the buses waiting for me. Mom and Mark were already there as well, and we were heading for the farm again this evening. A dark cloud hovered above me as I wandered from the truck toward my garden. As I passed the bees, I did not even consider that I had learned that day how to get honey from them. I wanted to ride my bike, and it was at home. I turned on the faucet at the back of the garage to start the sprinkler over my garden, and watched the imitation rain as it soaked the rows of dirt. When everything seemed good and wet, I turned it off and headed over to Fort Stix. Somehow, I was just not in the mood to hang out in my fort, and soon found myself sitting on the old bed in my room, looking through the box of magazines my grandfather gave me. To my surprise, there was a comic book in there, and it captured my attention. Normally, I was not much interested in comics unless I was eating and wanted something to read at the table. But this one seemed different, more shiny and newer than the old soft paper comics I was used to. I lost myself in the story and was reading at a fairly fast pace when I turned the page and a mailer card fell out into my lap. I usually just threw these away, but the picture of an electronic racetrack caught my eye. Looking at the page it fell from, I was intrigued. The ad said I could get a free slot car racing track in return for selling vegetable seeds. All I had to do was get people to place orders, and once they received their orders, I would earn points to use to redeem the prizes I wanted. Unlike the ads I usually found in comic books for 7-foot monsters or garlic-flavored chewing gum to prank your friends and ward off vampires, this ad was not asking for my money. Not that I had any anyway. Since I knew about gardening now, kinda, it seemed that it was my job to promote these seeds. I filled the card out, and we got home that evening, put it in the mailbox. It seems that destiny has a plan for all of us. At least it seemed that way to me at the time, because everything just fell into place. After mailing that card, it only took a few days for a catalog to come in the mail, along with instructions about how to place orders and redeem my points. By the weekend, I was sure I understood well enough to get started, and it turned out that we would not be going to the farm that weekend because my mother was feeling too tired due to being pregnant. Early Saturday morning, I was up before the dawn to get my cereal and watch cartoons. My dad had been out the night before with his friends and was still sleeping when I grabbed my catalog and headed out to try and sell seeds. Jumping on my bike, I headed for a neighborhood nearby where the houses had larger lots and I knew a lot of the people had gardens. I had never done door-to-door sales before, but I had seen it done on television. Recalling what I saw, I knew it was important to be clean with combed hair, be polite, and to make my point quickly when greeting people. Being clean and neat in appearance was easy for me. My grandmother in Lake Station would always correct me if I was not wearing a belt, had my shirt tucked in, and my hair combed. Sometimes, she would even interrupt in the middle of a game of hide and seek to comb my hair. I believed I could do this and set about making it happen. To my surprise, almost every home I stopped at where I could see a garden in the backyard placed an order for vegetable seeds. I wrote up their orders and gave them a copy of it and moved along. By lunchtime, I had sold enough seed packets to earn points to get that slot car racetrack 3 times over. I went back home and put the orders into the prepaid envelope and put it in the mailbox. Back in my room after lunch, I was resting and looking through that comic book again when I came across another company's ad for selling greeting cards. I knew everyone loved greeting cards almost as much as seeds, so I went ahead and filled out that card too. I put it in the mailbox with the seed order just in time to watch the mailman come by and pick them up. They say April showers bring May flowers, and these words were a bane to my existence. While the garden began to grow very lush and produce vegetables with all the rain, I was stuck indoors a lot and unable to ride my bike. The worst was when we were at the farm when it rained, because the rain seemed to amplify the musty old smell of the farmhouse. That smell never went away. What people don't tell you is that May flowers also come with weeds. Lots and lots of weeds that must be pulled and removed from the garden. Since we were fast approaching the end of the school year and would be moving into the farm, we started spending more time there. Every afternoon, Dad would pick me up from school and we would go to the farm where he worked on the house or his shop in the garage while I pulled weeds in my garden. I had done well selling seeds during the early spring when people were planting gardens. Then, as those sales stopped, the sales of greeting cards kept me busy when I was at home and able to go out on my bike. I had submitted my orders to redeem my points and had not only the racetrack but also several other things I chose from the catalogs coming in the mail. I was done with selling for now and had only to wait the standard 6 to 8 weeks for my prizes to be delivered. Knowing we would be living at the farm by the time they arrived, I made sure to put in the change of address when I placed my orders. All in all, spring turned out to be a very productive season for me. Having built Fort Stix and started my garden gave me things to look forward to at the new farm. Then there were the new racetrack and other things earned from my experience with door-to-door sales. The only downside was that Kenny never returned to school. Even though we were not best friends, he was my friend and I missed him. After he was gone a while, I asked the teacher and she said his family had moved away. Somehow, this did not surprise me. Perhaps it was because my own father moved us often and moving was just what happened. On Friday afternoon at the end of the first week in May, I walked out of school expecting to see my dad waiting for me. He was not there. Was I supposed to ride the bus home, or was he late? I was unsure of what I should do. Then I heard someone calling my name and looked up to see my uncle walking toward me. "Hey, Kevin, come on," he said, holding out a hand to me. "Your dad asked me to pick you up because he had to take your mom to the hospital to have the baby." "Really?" I asked, surprised. "She's going to have the baby before we move to the farm?" He just smiled and opened the car door for me. I climbed in and sat still while he fastened my seatbelt. I never wore a seatbelt in my dad's truck, but my uncle would not drive if we did not have our seatbelts on. As we drove to his house, I wondered what it would be like to have a new younger brother. I hoped this one would at least not be as annoying as Mark, always screaming for Mom. My aunt greeted me with a big hug and asked me if I had a good day at school. Then she led me inside and gave me a snack to hold me until dinner, along with my 2 cousins. I did not really know what to think. Mom was in the hospital to have my new baby brother, and I was at my aunt's house with my cousins and uncle. We passed the evening watching television, and then I was given a blanket and pillow and allowed to sleep on the couch. I loved my aunt's couch. It was very fluffy and soft compared to ours. I drifted off to sleep quite quickly that evening. The next morning, I woke to the smells of cigarettes and coffee, as well as multiple adult voices coming from the kitchen. I climbed from the couch and slowly stumbled into the kitchen to see what was happening. It seemed most of the family from the area were gathered here. My grandmother was sitting next to my mother, who was holding the baby with a towel draped over her chest. My aunt and uncle were busy cooking, and my dad sat across the table drinking coffee and smoking as usual as he talked with Grandpa. Suddenly, I was wrapped in a hug and spun around as my face was covered in long hair, and I smelled a light hint of perfume. It was my favorite aunt, the youngest of all of them, who had recently returned from Panama where she was with her husband. I didn't even know she was back in town yet, and it made me very happy to see her. We talked for a few minutes about Panama and when she came back, and then she took me over to see the baby. Mom had just finished feeding the baby and was laying him on the side table to change his diaper. I looked down at the soft pink features with wonder. I didn't know people could be this small. Then Mom took the diaper off and I was shocked. Where was his thingy? There was only a couple of loose folds of skin where his thingy was supposed to be. What's the matter, Kevin? My aunt asked. Where's his thingy? I asked quietly. How's he going to pee without it? Laughter erupted around me and I was wrapped in another hug. Girls don't have thingies, my aunt said. This is your baby sister. My mind was a whirl now. Sister? A girl? But girls and boys aren't supposed to be together. Girls have cooties. I looked around for Mark, but he was nowhere to be seen. I turned to go and find him because now, as annoying as he was, we had to stick together. We had an infiltrator in our midst. I hope you enjoyed this look into the campaign at Fort Stix. That's all for now, but I'll be back again next week with another story, just for you. Until then, sleep well.